and welcome to the third conversation in looking at the impact of coronavirus on regional Australia. My name is Kate Charters and I'm the chair of the session today. I'm also the chair of SEGRA, which is the acronym for Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia. SEGRA is delighted to welcome you to this third conversation about the impact of coronavirus on regional Australia. And we're pleased that we've been fully subscribed for this latest episode. So for this reason, it's not going to be possible for people to actually talk during the panel discussion, but there is a chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and I strongly encourage you to use that or the Q&A box to have an input both in terms of questions and information about your own circumstances. We'll review all the comments. We'll try and answer some of them as we're going through the session, and then we'll also include them in the communique that we'll put out at the end of this webinar. We also have a recording of the event that will be available later today. Well, as this pandemic races around the world and Australian territory and state governments act to address the unfolding situation, SEGRA wanted to provide a forum where people who live, work and invest in regional Australia can advance the issues impacting on us. These impacts will be across health, the broader community, broader economy, education, business, and lifestyle, to name a few. We're very pleased today that we have with us Jim Cavaye from the University of Tasmania to join us in the panel. We also have Robert Prestipino online, and I welcome you, Robert, to bring us up to date to where we're at the minute.
Oh, hi, Kate. Yep, good to be here again. Things are changing quickly again this week. What I'll do is quickly share my screen to talk about the chart from last week. It's sort of evolving, but our conversations are all about the future, that we know at the end of this, everyone says it will end, there will be a post-pandemic regional Australia, and it will be different. So we're trying through these conversations to very early work out how we might influence that outcome, and using the notion of how might we eventually develop a brief for building that regional bridge to Regional Australia 2.0. And certainly being far more proactive in what the changes might be rather than, I suppose, just reactive to it. So since last week, we've dumped a lot more of the issues that came out of our discussions with Ben Lyons and the others. So it's sort of starting to mount up a bit. I've sort of just changed the chart a little bit because it was getting a bit crowded lines. But we've got about 15 issues here. I'll quickly go over the sort of things that are becoming fairly common in our conversation, and looking at those broad catch areas of business, education, health, well-being and lifestyle as just ways of focusing across issues. But we've come up in our conversations about, yes, we need to, in the outcome of this, we need to build a bridge that still retains economic vitality. There's discussion that in that process, we need to be looking at actively strengthening economic diversification. There's been a few discussions around the impact on supply chain and risk management in the future and what that might mean. It came up discussions that we need to really understand workforce casualisation and what COVID-19 will mean to regional Australia, since we have 1 in 4 Australians that are in casual employment. Institutional transfer from universities and others, how can we do that better? What the role may or may not be. That this process will look at expanding people's digital capability. There's also discussion about we should use this time to prepare to relaunch regional Australia at the other end of it. So businesses, community and others use this time not to panic but to prepare. And ideas about we should be actively promoting idea leaders to give us some of the thoughts or encourage the new ways of thinking or solutions. We've acknowledged at the end of this online work and everything else is going to be a consumer shift. What might that mean to regional Australia? It will be different. Already where people are talking about the impacts on seasonal labour, the shutdown of borders, So that's an issue that'll need to be really unpacked. And also raising that there needs to be a fast access to the support packages. And I know there's a lot of agency in government, and that's a real priority at the moment, dealing with that in the short term. People have clearly talked about improving internet access for regional Australia. That's going to be an even bigger issue. But also about the impact, concern about sustaining our social fabric in regional Australia, countering the social isolation that the quarantine will do and what that might mean, and concern about mental health issues with COVID being on the back of drought and fire in the regional communities. So you can see this is fleshing out a bit from last week's map, and as we go on, I'm sure we'll start clustering these ideas even further as our speakers give us even deeper insights to these ideas and more. So I'll just hand back to you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Robert. And that's a very timely map, I suppose, of the sorts of issues that are coming up. And I suppose one of the questions is, what are we doing with those issues? And at the end of each of the webinars, we're putting forward a communique to put down or highlight some of the actions that people can take. So we're really trying to be very proactive, and that's why I encourage you to share things that you're actually doing. And I suppose one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is the support package access, and it's targeted at small business, but not necessarily micro businesses. And I think there are a lot of micro businesses out in regional Australia. And the other thing I think is that the business structures in regional Australia are quite different from those in capital cities. And so that's one of the areas that we're working through at the moment. So now, if I could turn to you, Jim, thank you very much for joining us from the Cradle Coast. What's happening in your region in regard to COVID-19?
Well, it's very much the same as across the country. We're pretty much in shutdown across Tasmania, and the headline in the Hobart Mercury last week was, "We've got a moat and we're not afraid to use it." So I think this is a deep-seated Tasmanian thing about shutting the state down and preventing people coming. But no, I jest. It's having a major impact here, as it is across the world. People are losing jobs. Businesses, I think, are going to really struggle to survive this in many regional communities. I think that we're seeing huge impacts on how people are coping with this, and I think our communities will be changed. If not permanently, they will take years to recover from this. It's great to see the proactive approach that governments and others are taking around this, but all those elements of economic development in regions that you and I and everyone has been working on over the years, in terms of diversification of local economies, trying to build opportunities for young people, trying to build tourism in regional areas, improving digital connectivity, all of those things are going to be set back by this, at least temporarily. But there are impacts that I wanted to talk about, and also opportunities in this. Do you want me to head off with those?
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks, Jim.
Let me start by saying that in terms of impacts, and what Robert's provided is a very detailed view of how things are, and that's based on input from previous webinars. And I'm not pretending to go over all of those, but I just wanted to highlight a few key things to stimulate some discussion. In terms of regional Australia, the impacts are much the same as what we're seeing across the whole of Australia. So in terms of impacts on businesses and, for example, education, like there's every chance that Year 12 will be significantly disrupted, and how students finishing Year 12 will go on to further education or employment is an issue, and there's many other impacts, and those things impact on regional Australia as much as they do anywhere else. But on top of that, we do have the cumulative impacts that Robert mentioned about drought, and in many areas in the southeast particularly, bushfires as well. So this comes on top of those really major impacts that regional Australia is coping with already. And one of the key impacts will be around business, particularly small and medium enterprises in regional Australia. All those businesses that have been struggling through the drought are now faced with shutdown for several months probably. And that's going to have a major impact, not just on employment, but also on population change, the demography of regional Australia as well. We are going to see a drift of population away from regions, I'm almost certain of it, and it's just going to be accelerated by this temporary shutdown.
Jim, on that point, do you think that'll accelerate that sort of ageing cluster that regional Australia's already got?
Exactly. This is exactly the point, that everyone ages at the same rate, but of course in regional Australia we have a much higher proportion of people in the older age brackets, and young people, we have about a 30% underrepresentation of people between 19 and 29 in regional areas across the country. And that's in some ways a good thing. It's driven by four main things, and they all start with E. It's to do with employment, education, exploration, then trying to find backpack around Europe and do all those kinds of things. And it's also around entertainment as well. So there are push and pull factors there, but what we're seeing is this underrepresentation. So if we struggle with employment in regional areas, young people particularly are going to continue to move at a much higher rate. Older people in regional areas tend to so-called age in situ. They don't necessarily move. And the issue around that, one of the many, is that in a rational economic sense, if you are older in a regional town, you would say, oh, well, I'll move to the next largest centre and I'll access aged care and health support there. But there are many factors that keep older Australians in regional communities, and they stay there for those reasons. It's mostly to do with family connection, history, heritage, culture, all, social networks. So the risk is that with this aging demographic, people will continue to live in regional communities, but their standard of living, their quality of life will decline. That's an overarching issue across regional Australia. So this population shift will accelerate as a result of COVID, almost certainly. But I think also one of the impacts will be, it will be around this, what I call the charity narrative of regional Australia. The sort of woe is us, poor me, put $2 in the tin for the struggling farmers. That kind of narrative of regional Australia really destroys, in my personal view, a lot of the economic opportunity that we have. Because what young person is going to be interested in moving to a regional area if that's the narrative about regional Australia? It's not the true narrative, but it is one of the narratives that has developed over the last several years. And I'm not knocking for a minute that people are struggling and do need help, not knocking that for a moment. But there has been a narrative that has developed that really makes regional Australia unattractive. I'll just finish on a few opportunities that I see around here. One is around sort of the collective nature, the collective contact that we have with each other. I think COVID has really re-emphasised the social obligation of people. Self-isolating, doing the right thing to protect the health of others, us coming together collectively as a community to try and cope with this. We're not relying on the government to fix it. It's really our own individual behaviour that will manage this situation. I think that really re-emphasises what we already know are the key building blocks of communities in regions, and that's the so-called selfless act, where we do things based on our concern and care for others and not for our own benefit. So this whole concept of caring for each other is a really critical part of community building. And I can see the COVID situation actually reinforcing that. I think it also puts our lives into perspective. We are less driven, I think, in the last few weeks around getting ahead, and we've got a reminder in this that the true things in life that value are our health, our family, our community, those kinds of things. And in fact, people are starting to value the basics of food, for example, production from agriculture. They're starting to say, well, we really value the fact that we can access food. And the other opportunity that has come has been what I call digital familiarity. I wouldn't call it digital competence. I call it digital familiarity. People of an older age bracket, like myself, are becoming much more familiar and comfortable with digital technology. And that's going to really help us progress the development of the digital economy in regional areas. There's a whole other discussion about access to digital, which still remains a major challenge in regional areas. But for those that can access it, improving our familiarity and our ability to work and our comfort with digital technology is going to help us with economic development, because for a long time I have felt that economic development in regional Australia is not going to be driven by the smokestack chasing culture or bring BHP to town. And we've known that for years. It's going to be driven by small businesses that are largely established on the internet, and they're mostly established by women. That's been my prediction for a long time. And a lot of employment and economic development is going to occur in that way. There are just some suggestions about the impacts and the opportunities in this. I was very keen to just get your reaction, your feedback to some of that.
Well, Jim also, I thought your story about internet access in your particular location, because the narrative at the moment is everyone stay at home and work online, but it's a different outcome at your university. You want to unpack that a bit?
Absolutely. So one of the issues we face here is universities are, we are trying to be a progressive university. So we're not trying to be the traditional, only the smart kids go there kind of university. We are very much about being embedded in our communities and adapting to what people in our communities want in terms of higher education and research. So we have lots of people in regional Tasmania, and I can relate to my previous experience in regional Queensland, that don't have good internet access. They're the first in family to access university. Their success at university is often dependent on seeing others succeed from their cohort. So we are, ironically, we are trying desperately to keep our campus open. So instead of saying to people, go home and study online, not everyone has good internet, not everyone has a home situation that is conducive to that. And parents with kids and sole parents and these sorts of things often need to access a place like a university campus to do their study. So we are desperately trying to keep our campus open. So people will come in, we've got our computers 2 meters apart, and they can study here. So it's a sort of a ironic situation.
Jim, I'm really interested in the question or the issue of community building. I suppose I'm hearing a few things from where I'm sitting. Is I'm hearing a little bit of it won't happen to us, we're remote and socially isolated already. So whether or not that's impacting behaviour, but what sorts of things might communities be looking at, particularly in regional Australia where they perhaps are more rural or remote? What sorts of things should we be looking at in terms of community building now, but also after the coronavirus?
Well, while people in regional Australia are more remote and naturally separated from each other, the impact of the COVID shutdown is those normal social gatherings that occur in regional communities can't happen for the time being, at least. And also we have key social hubs in communities, whether it be the pub, the cricket club, the drinks after work, those kinds of things, they're shut down for the time being. So that is one of the other really major impacts of this shutdown, is that those natural social hubs are no longer able to happen. But I think, Kate, there is a real rediscovery of collective responsibility in this, because the management of this crisis is not up to emergency services or to government or someone outside communities. It's really up to our individual behaviour inside communities. I think it has re-emphasised that idea of caring for each other and recognizing that our behavior has impacts on others, and also that we are in this together, and that we have no alternative but to all work together to address this issue. I think that is an opportunity to really rediscover social capital and community connection.
Jim, with that though, be a bit of devil's advocate, is how do you then place panic buying, hoarding, which is extremely selfish, that's which is an outcome of fear, which is an outcome of lack of information and leadership. So I really take on board what you're saying, but you know, a counterpoint could be, oh, we look out there and it seems like a lot of people are just fending for themselves.
Of course. And I knew you were going to raise that. So in all communities, you get people who do not buy in to the collective culture, the collective caring. And not everyone has the values of community, and for whatever reason. So on one hand, I would say, yes, in all communities, we accept that there are people who do not buy into that value base. And that may be because they're recalcitrant or, you know, sort of anti-community, but it is, as you say, it's driven by fear and concern and worry and uncertainty. And that's a natural human thing. So it's not that these people are evil criminals, it's just that their fear and uncertainty has overtaken them. However, I will say that I'll go so far as to say that the media coverage of panic buying has probably created a much greater perception of that than what's actually happening. Sure, it is going on, there's no doubt. But I think that there is a much greater perception of it happening through the media than is in reality, particularly in regional communities.
Now, Jim, we've got a couple of questions have come in. One is from Ben, who's saying to us, I agree on digital familiarity concept and strengthening with the local impact awareness issue. For example, now the neighbour and their livelihood is at risk. The response is very similar to the bushfire and drought scenarios of what can we do. Can you expand a bit on how you can enhance and sustain this motivation to become more digitally aware?
And Ben, thanks for your question. We've done work in the southwest of Queensland around the impacts of gaining digital connectivity, and it's clear that there are major benefits, but it depends entirely on people's use of the digital technology. It's not so much the broadband speed that's important, although it is, but how we make use of digital technology in regional Australia depends very much on people's familiarity with it and being able to use it. So we have situations where we have tourism businesses in outback towns who are not just pastoral communities, but tourism communities now, and major tourism businesses there that have a website, but if you want to book accommodation, it says, please phone this number between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. So we need to get more digitally savvy in regional Australia to make full use of the digital economy. So that depends on people being comfortable and familiar with it. So how might we progress that? How might we develop that further? It comes down to people largely being self-taught, and I think that there's some intergenerational connection we can make to help people become more self-taught. And also, I think we do need to roll out more training and more sort of support for people who are getting onto that. I hope I'm interpreting the question right.
I know where I live that libraries have been offering technology classes for older people for quite some time, and perhaps that's, as you just alluded to, perhaps there has to be some specific focus on training. Intergenerational is a great idea. Leads me to another question that we have here, which is, what conversations can we have with our youth? What can we do to empower them?
That is a massive question. Well, for a start, all community development starts with what people are motivated about. What are their felt needs? What are the things that bug them? And what are the things that inspire them and motivate them? So in terms of how we can engage and empower young people, really depends on us, the rest of the community, leadership, so to speak, genuinely being able to engage and listen to what they see as the issues that they would like to see addressed and the opportunities that they would like to see progressed. So that often depends on personal relationships. So there are people in communities that are really well connected with young people, and that could be the school teacher, it could be the scoutmaster, it could be the footy coach, but they are the key hubs for young people where they feel comfortable talking and interacting. And any opportunity we can take to listen to young people's views and to seriously progress the issues that they raise, that is the way to empower young people. And it's often driven not through formal governance arrangements, it's often driven through those personal relationships and connection between people at the local level.
Thanks, Jim. Now, we have another question, but it's about the role of local governments and as leaders in the community response. I'll throw to you to perhaps make a comment on that, but also draw attention to the fact that on our Tuesday webinar next week, we have the Deputy Mayor of Geelong and the Mayor of Glenelg both on our session. So they will be talking particularly about the roles of local government as leaders in the community response. But you might just have some thoughts about the leadership of regional communities at this point in time.
I wonder too, Jim, could we morph that into something, it is about government, but you know, we've got federal, state, local, and you said earlier about community leading the values and volunteering. And some would say there's a bit of a disturbing trend that, you know, with the bushfires, the volunteers had to save Australia. Even in Queensland, they're only shutting schools because parents are keeping their kids home. So again, community action or value action seems to be driving government policy rather than government actually leading anything. And there is a bit of a concern in circles about this leaning on volunteerism to fix problems that we've got 3 levels of government that are supposed to do something. I mean, what are your thoughts about that when you're saying about volunteerism and all that's positive, and it is having a leadership role, is there all some question marks about that or where we're heading in that direction?
Absolutely there are. So I'll make the observation that in all of the response at the government level, local government has been pretty hidden behind a lot of the response. It's been largely federal and state. And it may well be, the reason for that is that they've got the money and they're the ones that are putting the significant funding behind coping with the crisis. But local government is an absolutely critical level of government in terms of community mobilisation. So the key aspect of local government is that it's local. And not only can it respond to local issues and custom make responses to the local situation, but it can mobilise communities. So government is not, particularly at the local level, it is not something that just delivers services and you know you pay your rates and you get your garbage picked up, although many people interpret it that way. A modern local government is one that is genuinely engaged with its community and sees community issues and opportunities as a joint responsibility with the community. Now, that doesn't mean we are just delegating the responsibility to volunteers and, oh, community, you fix yourself up. Local governments are, in the 21st century, they are looking at how do we mobilise communities with local government and other levels of government and the private sector, if possible, to address issues that can only really be addressed collaboratively. Now, that might be utopian, but there are local governments that get that, and it's about partnership, genuinely. It's about working with volunteers and community organisations and others to address these kinds of issues. So it's not just about governments that deliver services, and many local governments are flat out just doing that. It is about not just delivering services, but fostering the strength of community at the same time, and that's the challenge. They have to not only deliver good services and do it efficiently and with limited budgets and limited staff, but they also need to work in a way that fosters community capacity at the same time. That's really where a modern local government sits.
On a positive note, I've just got in our chat box that the City of Launceston's just launched an 8.5 million business and community response strategy to be voted in next week's council meeting. Has all the councillors and the local LCC on board. So I think that that'd be worth us following up. Someone's also asked us about the map that Robert put up earlier, and will that be available? Yes, all the resources that we're using will be available, and Meta will put in the chat box links for, to those, or you can go to segra.com.au. Now, we've got another, the awareness, how do we change this? Jim, digital inclusion, closing the gap, as you identified, has existed since the technology began. The awareness of being disconnected from society and community without access to the internet is rising quickly. How can we change this?
Boy, that's a question we've been grappling with since the internet came about. It still remains a major issue. So we have the NBN, and we have had other specific regional programs to get fast broadband into regional Australia. But as we all know, we're still very well short of having fast broadband across most of regional Australia, to be honest. Sure, it might be in the major centres, but anything beyond there, you will struggle. So even in large centres, you can only go like a couple of kilometres out of some of our major regional centres, and you don't have internet access or good internet access. There have been obviously some changes. You know, the Sky Muster satellite has improved internet capacity in very remote Australia, and that has had an impact on children in education there. However, as soon as the Sky Muster satellite was launched, it was oversubscribed straight away. So it's still a huge issue for us. All I can say about fixing that is we just still need continued investment in getting fast broadband internet. What we found in our work is that mobile phone coverage, as we can improve the mobile phone coverage in the bush, people are starting more and more to access internet through the mobile phone network rather than through cable or satellite. And that raises the issue of cost. So there are some businesses in remote Australia that have, to operate their business, they have to operate through a mobile phone service, and it's just outrageously expensive for them. So I have no silver bullet answer to that one. We just need continued public and private investment in the expansion of internet access. And this COVID situation has just absolutely put a spotlight on that issue.
Jim, coming back to universities and thinking and research, what are your thoughts about the problem-solving approach that COVID-19 offers, in the sense of how should we be thinking, how should we be approaching problem-solving, thinking about it? What should we expect? What's the challenge in this sort of problem?
Universities are going through a cultural shift at the moment, or those that are engaged with regional Australia should be. We're moving from the traditional, what will I say, disconnected approach of a university, where it's seen as a place of where only the smart kids go, where we do research that is disconnected from communities. We write scientific papers that no one ever reads, and our impact in communities is very, very limited. Now, that's a fairly jaded view, but I think it's a fairly accurate one. This is a way of, this is a challenge for us to accelerate that cultural change. So universities need to become much more embedded and responsive to its regions. Universities need to see themselves as a player amongst many in regional development. So many organisations have a role in regional development, and we're not projecting universities into that space entirely, taking over from RDA and state government and all the rest, but we are a player, and we can do a couple of things. We can be responsive around our teaching and learning so that we produce graduates that are able to participate in the 21st century economy. So our graduates need to not only participate in the 2020 economy, they need to be able to participate in the 2030 economy when they leave university. Secondly, we need to do research that does contribute to knowledge. It contributes to global knowledge about issues, but it at the same time needs to help create outcomes in communities. So communities need to be able to have direct benefit from research and not just have a altruistic, contribution to global knowledge. So creating that is a challenge for universities, and it fundamentally challenges the incentives that are embedded in universities at the moment. There are incentives that are built on a performance base around research grants, quality of papers, these kinds of academic outcomes. But I think the community more and more wants to see that move into outcomes in communities and in regions. And I will go so far as to say that in research, universities have been one of the main culprits in exploiting regional communities. They actually mine regional communities for data and information, and they take that data and they write papers about it. And communities don't see that benefiting them at all. And it's an exploitative model, and we need to fundamentally change that.
Thanks for that, Jim.
Just to follow on to that, down to the practical side of, I suppose it's a design thinking approach, that because we were talking earlier and you were alluding to the sort of trade-offs and the agility of a wicked problem that's facing us. I wonder if you could talk about that as a scenario for the COVID problem we're thinking about every day.
COVID is a classic example of a so-called wicked problem. If people are familiar with it, one of the key characteristics of a wicked problem is that the goalposts change all the time, and you can't have a clear line of sight between here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's the outcome. What happens is almost on a daily basis, the goalposts move. And I know a journalist last night asked one of the government ministers about how come you made this decision on Monday and how come you reversed it on Thursday? And the answer was, well, the situation's changing. That's it. So we have this reductionist way of thinking of the world where, oh, well, here's a problem and the problem stays still. It's just a static thing. And we just have to work out what the one and only solution is to that problem, and we'll be right. That's not the case with COVID, and it's not the case with many things. The nature of the problem changes on a daily basis. The nature of our perception of that changes. The nature of the solution changes, and there is no one solution. There are many things that we can do, but not any one of them is ever going to solve it. And so COVID is just a classic example of that. And it just re-emphasizes the fact that there is no one group or organization responsible for the fix. It's a collaborative effort of trying to fix it as we can and working our way through it. That's the nature of what we're dealing with.
I think that this has been really interesting to watch National Cabinet in action, because so frequently the community wants instant answers and it wants certainty, and yet many of the problems that we're faced with in the 2020s are wicked problems. And so I think it's been interesting and positive to see a cabinet meeting, a national cabinet meeting that isn't looking to just blanket statements and make things for the long term. So I think that that's been an interesting switch in how we normally look at policy. There's a couple of other questions. One from Glenys: what strategies would you suggest to retain youth in regional areas in the recovery period? That's one, and we'll certainly get onto that later in other webinars that are coming up, conversations that are coming up. The second one was: last week Shoalhaven City Council adopted a 25% rate cut across the board without any consultation as its response to the economic cost of the pandemic. How do you rate this response? It's a tricky one.
Okay, let me just start with youth quickly. The secret to youth in regional Australia is employment. And it's not just casual, seasonal, part-time employment. It is career entry employment that requires skills and long-term opportunities to build a career. So that's hard to come by in regional areas. So we have to think about how might we create those kinds of jobs in regions. That is the only, well, one of the key ways in which young people are going to be retained and attracted to regions. The other thing I'll add is one of the main ways in which young people move into regional Australia is through professional jobs. So nurses, teachers, doctors, police officers, often young people, career entry young people that go to regions. And some of them go there out of sufferance and some of them go there positively. So anything that a community can do to welcome and involve and participate with those kinds of young people to prevent the churn of young professionals is a really key thing. And that's everything from welcome to the footy team, you know, and being socially engaged with them rather than seeing them as outsiders and transients and, oh, they'll come and go. Communities really need to get their act together around that. But the key thing is employment, career entry employment. Moving on to rates. What I'll say about that is that every little bit helps. In this crisis, businesses and individuals are going to need every single little bit of help that they can get. I'll also add that most of the income in regional local governments does not come from rates. It comes from federal assistance grants. And that's how most regional local governments get by. So cutting rates and giving rate relief is a great idea, and it does help, but ratepayers and citizens should recognise that rates are not what sustains most regional local governments. It's federal government.
Thanks very much, Jim. And we need to wrap up now. So if I could just again thank you very much for agreeing to participate in our conversation, but also agreeing to take questions without notice. Thank you very much.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for the opportunity. It's just great to discuss these sorts of issues. And COVID, while it is a major issue and it's going to have lasting impacts in regional Australia, things that are pretty scary, there will be a recovery. Sooner or later, there will be a recovery, and we need to not only do everything we can to reduce the impact of the crisis at the time, but we also need to prepare ourselves for the recovery. And that may take years, but we in regional development need to look at how regional Australia can emerge in a new sort of way from this crisis.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now we'll circulate a communique at the end of Monday that captures the ideas in today's conversations and the remarks in the chat box. We also have our latest news section on the SEGRA website, and Meta's put up at both the top of the chat screen and the bottom of the chat screen how you can access those resources. If you'd like to contact me directly, my email is kate@segra.com.au, or if you wanted to contact Robert, it's robert@vitalplaces.com.au. We have another webinar on Tuesday where we'll be welcoming the Deputy Mayor of Boulogne and the Mayor of Glenelg to talk about the local government, the role of local government in this crisis and building community resilience. Thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to talking again next week.